I'm going to carry the cross for theism. And I want to point out that I think we're both trying to explain the world around us. We both have the burden of proof to explain why reality is the way it is. I have to show how reality is best explained by theism, and Christopher has to explain how reality is best explained by atheism. And I think we should follow the evidence where it leads. I think that the evidence we see all around us and within us leads to a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, personal, powerful, intelligent, moral creator, i.e. what we would call a theistic God. And this creator created this universe and the life within us, or the life within it, I should say. Now, I'm going to try and summarize my 450-page book, at least the first 200 pages of it, in the next 20 minutes, or next 18 minutes at this point now, and that is an impossible task. That would be about 20 pages a minute. Actually, I probably can do it because I'm originally from New Jersey. See, I speak at 150 words a minute with gusts to 350. So if I go a little quick and you want to see more of the evidence, please get the book. I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. And I want to point out that all the proceeds from the sale of the book will go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay? See, I've got 3 sons. The oldest 2 are in college right now, so I need a little help, and one of them is sitting right over here. All right, Christopher, on page 282 of God is Not Great, available at fine bookstores everywhere, says this: thanks to the telescope and the microscope, religion no longer offers an explanation for anything important. I think that is exactly wrong. I think due to the telescope and the microscope, we are seeing evidence that leads directly to God. I'm going to give you 3 major arguments for this, and then I'm going to give you 4 more that are a result, I think, of a theistic worldview. I'm going to spend most of my time on the 3, and then I'll just mention the last 4. The 3 are the cosmological argument from the beginning of the universe. The next one is the teleological argument from the design of the universe and the design of life. And the third is the moral argument. Let's start with the cosmological argument. And this is basically the argument from the Big Bang, that the universe had a beginning. If it had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. Now, for some reason, Christians are afraid of the Big Bang. I'm not afraid of the Big Bang. I believe in the Big Bang. I just think I know who banged it. Now, the evidence for the Big Bang is good. I'm going to give you evidence in an acronym, SURGE, S-U-R-G-E. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because I think even Christopher in his book on page 65 says the Big Bang is the accepted origin of the universe. S stands for the second law of thermodynamics, that the universe is running down. As that sun is up there, it is burning out. Ultimately, we will go to heat death, as Christopher has said in his book. Well, if the universe is eternal, that sun would have burned out a long time ago, but since the sun is still up there, and we still have energy here, the universe must have had a beginning. The second law of thermodynamics also says that ordered things go toward disorder. It affects the school. We have to paint the walls. We have to put gas in our car. The second law of thermodynamics also affects us as human beings. When you get older, the second law of thermodynamics is seen by the fact that we all get dresser disease. That's when our chest falls into our drawers. See, that's the second law of thermodynamics. The U in SURGE is the fact that the universe is expanding, discovered by Edwin Hubble in 1929. Hubble deduced that if the universe is expanding, if you watched everything in reverse, you would see it collapse back to a point, mathematically and logically, to nothing. So the universe exploded into being out of nothing. The G stands for the great galaxy, the R stands for the radiation echo, discovered by accident by Penzias and Wilson, 2 scientists working at Bell Labs in Homedale, New Jersey. They discovered basically the radiation afterglow, or the remnant heat from the initial Big Bang explosion. The heat is still out there. It's just a couple of degrees above absolute zero. Now, good theories predict future discoveries, and they said if the radiation afterglow is out there and the Big Bang really did occur, we ought to find very fine temperature variations among the radiation afterglow. So they sent up a satellite in 1989 to circle the Earth. It's called the Kobe Space Satellite, to measure this radiation afterglow. And for 3 years, they found nothing until they tuned their instruments just a little bit more precisely and found that there were temperature variations in the radiation afterglow, and they were down to 1 part in 100,000. George Smoot, the leader of the expedition, said, if you're religious, it's like looking at God. Stephen Hawking said this is the greatest discovery of cosmology, perhaps the greatest discovery of all time. Those temperature variations allowed galaxies to ultimately form so we could ultimately be here. The E in surge stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity, which says time, space, and matter are correlative. You can't have space without time. You can't have time without space and matter. And in effect, it says that the universe came into existence with space and time together. In other words, once there was no time, once there was no space, once there was no matter, and then bang, out of nothing, the universe exploded into being. What is nothing? Aristotle had a good definition of nothing. He said nothing is what rocks dream about. Nothing. There was no thing. There was not positive and negative energy, as Isaac Asimov has said. There was not a vacuum. There was not swirling mathematical points, as Dr. Atkins has said from Oxford. There was nothing, what rocks dream about, which means that the universe exploded into being, all space, all matter, all time, out of nothing. And several scientists have pointed this out. Stephen Hawking said almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Agnostic astronomer Robert Jastrow, the man who sits in Edwin Hubble's chair, or who did until February when he died, he was an agnostic. He sat at Mount Wilson and looked through Hubble's telescope. He wrote a book in 1978 called God and the Astronomers. And here's what Jastrow wrote. Or here's what he said, actually, in an interview. He said, astronomers now found they've painted themselves into a corner because they have proven by their own methods that the world began abruptly in an act of creation to which you can trace the seeds of every star, every planet, every living thing in this cosmos and on the earth. And they have found that all this has happened as a product of forces they cannot hope to discover. That there are what I or anyone would call supernatural forces at work is now, I think, a scientifically proven fact. Why isn't an agnostic astronomer saying supernatural forces are at work? Why couldn't nature have created the universe? Because there was no nature. There was nothing, what rocks dream about, and then the entire space-time continuum leapt into existence. If it's not a natural cause, by definition, it must be a supernatural cause, something beyond the natural. In fact, Arthur Eddington, the contemporary of Einstein, who was an expert in general relativity, said, quote, "The beginning seems to present insuperable difficulties unless we agree to look on it as frankly supernatural." So the cosmological argument leaves us with one question. Either no one created something out of nothing or someone created something out of nothing. The atheistic view is no one created something out of nothing. The theistic view is someone created something out of nothing. Which view is more reasonable? I think Julie Andrews had it right. Nothing comes from nothing. Nothing ever could. That's the cosmological argument. The teleological argument, the design argument, actually has two arguments contained within it. It is the argument from design. And there are dozens of factors about the universe that are precisely designed for the existence of the universe and life. So not only did the universe explode into being out of nothing, it did so with incredible precision. Stephen Hawking has noted that the universe would not exist if there was a decrease in the expansion rate 1 second after the Big Bang by only 1 part in 100,000 million. This led Hawking to conclude it would be very difficult to explain why the universe should have begun in just this way, except as an act of God who intended to create beings like us. Not only is it designed in terms of its expansion, but the gravitational force is so precise. If you change the gravitational force by 1 part in 10 to the 40, nothing would exist. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40? Stretch a tape measure across the entire known universe. Set gravity at 1 inch on that, anywhere on that tape measure. If you move gravity, the force of gravity, 1 inch in either direction, we don't exist. There's also factors about our universe, in particular our solar system, that cannot be explained unless there's a designer behind it. For example, the Earth rotation, 24 hours, just right. If it was a little bit more, a little bit less, we wouldn't be here. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees, just right. Change that a little bit, we're not here. The Jupiter being in its current orbit. If Jupiter wasn't there, we'd be bombarded with space material. Why? Because Jupiter acts as a cosmic vacuum cleaner. It attracts all the cosmic space junk to it rather than us. There are a number of other factors I don't have time to get into, but Arno Penzias, the man who co-discovered the R in surge, the radiation afterglow, said this: Astronomy leads us to a unique event, a universe which was created out of nothing, one with the very delicate balance needed to provide exactly the right conditions required to permit life, and one which as an underlying, one might say, and one which has an underlying, one might say, supernatural plan. A friend of Christopher, atheist Stephen Weinberg, who is an atheist, put it this way: life as we know it would be impossible if any one of several physical quantities had slightly different values. So not only is the universe precisely tweaked, and by the way, there would be no life unless the universe was precisely fine-tuned, as I just mentioned, but life itself is designed. Let me take you to your breakfast table for just a second. Suppose you wanted to have a bowl of alphabet cereal. You're a teenager, and you come downstairs to have a bowl of alphabet cereal, and you see the alphabet cereal's knocked over, and the letters from the alphabet cereal are spelled out on the placemat, and it spells, "Take out the garbage, Mom." What are you going to assume? Cat knocked the box over? Earthquake shook the house? Or are you going to say, no, that's intelligent design from an intelligent being? Or let's say you're laying out on the beach and you see in the clouds, "Drink Coke." What are you going to assume? Unusual cloud formation? No, you're going to say there has to be a skywriter up there, even if you didn't see him. Why? Because messages only come from minds. Well, it turns out there's a message in all life called DNA. We all know about it. All life has a message. I have DNA, you have DNA, a banana has DNA. In Darwin's day, it was not known how incredibly complex, simple, so-called simple life is. And they thought that maybe simple life could come together without intelligent intervention, and ultimately natural selection could take over. It's the theory of macroevolution. I'm sure you've heard of it, from the goo to you via the zoo. From the infantile to the reptile to the crocodile to the gentile. That's the theory of macroevolution. The problem is that now we know that this intelligent life couldn't have come together by natural laws, because we now know that the simplest life has the amount of specified complexity or information in it in terms of DNA of 1,000 complete sets of Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, who's that according to? Not a Christian, not a theist. That's according to Richard Dawkins from his book Blind Watchmaker. I think it's page 116. Now, to believe that that resulted by natural law is like believing that the Library of Congress resulted from an explosion in a printing shop. See, I don't have enough faith to believe that. So life appears to be designed. In fact, Antony Flew, who was an atheist, a very prominent atheist, but recently became a theist, or at least a deist, as a result of this evidence, said, "It is impossible for evolution to account for the fact that one single cell can carry more data than all the volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica put together. It now seems to me that the findings of more than 50 years of DNA research have provided materials for a new and enormously powerful argument from design." How am I doing on time, Dean? 5 minutes. Okay, thank you. Design is so prevalent that even people like Francis Crick, the co-discoverer of DNA, Sir Fred Hoyle, who coined the term Big Bang in a derisive way, are now, or were, proponents of panspermia. Seeds everywhere, in other words, that life got deposited here by aliens, which is just kind of a backhanded way of saying that there's no way we know how life came by natural causes here. There must be aliens out there that brought it here. Which, of course, just puts the question off one more step. Where did the aliens come from, right? There's a lot more on the design argument, but I'm running out of time here. Let me just give you one quote from Chandra Wickramasinghe, who is a student of Sir Fred Hoyle. He said, "The emergence of life from a primordial soup on Earth is merely an article of faith." Sir Fred Hoyle said, "A common sense interpretation of the facts suggests that a super intellect has monkeyed with physics as well as chemistry and biology, and that there are no blind forces worth speaking about in nature." So cosmological argument, teleological argument. Now let's move on to the moral argument. If there is no God, you can't say that decapitating a man on a bus is objectively morally wrong. That's just your opinion. As Dostoevsky said, if there is no God, everything is permitted. Now, I want to be very clear here. I'm not saying that atheists can't know morality. They do. I'm not saying that atheists can't be moral. They can. I'm not saying that believing in God makes you more moral, as Christopher has pointed out, and as I say, I agree with much of what he writes here. I'm not saying that religious people are necessarily better than atheists. That's not the argument. The argument is that there's no way to say that a given act is moral or immoral unless there's a standard beyond humanity. It's not just my opinion, it's not just Christopher's opinion, or Mother Teresa's or Hitler's. There's a standard beyond everybody that defines what is right. That standard is God's very nature. Since objective moral laws exist, there must be an objective moral lawgiver. You say, no, there doesn't need to be any moral lawgiver. If there's a prescription, there must be a prescriber. If you go to the pharmacist and say, here, I'd like you to fill this prescription, and the pharmacist says, who prescribed it? And you go, nobody. Are you going to get your prescription? No. Now, there's a lot more on the moral argument. Maybe we can talk about it a little bit during the Q&A. But what can we learn from these three arguments for God? We can learn from the cosmological argument that this being must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. Why? Because it created space, time, and material. It must also be powerful. Why? Because it created out of nothing. Must be personal. Why? Because you can't go from a state of non-existence to a state of existence without making a choice, and only personal beings make choices. Impersonal forces do not. It must be intelligent. Why? Because it created in such a highly designed, razor's edge way. It must be moral. Why? Due to the moral argument, and of course it must be a creator. These attributes are the attributes of what the Bible would call God. Let me sum up what agnostic astronomer Robert Jastrow said after going through evidence like this. He said, for the scientist who has lived by his faith in the power of reason, remember he's the agnostic, the story ends like a bad dream. He has scaled the mountains of ignorance. He's about to conquer the highest peak. As he pulls himself over the final rock, he's greeted by a band of theologians who've been sitting there for centuries. 2 more minutes? Take 3. Thank you, sir. Those are the three main arguments. Now I'd like to say there's 4 additional truths about the universe that are better explained by theism than by atheism. First of all, reason and the laws of logic. Christopher is a self-described materialist, but if atheism is true, we have no grounds to know it because reason and thoughts are just chemical reactions in the brain. How can you have, even Einstein believed this. Einstein was a determinist. How can you trust what Christopher says if it's just chemical reactions going on in his brain and chemical reactions in our brain? See, chemicals don't reason, they react. Now, I'm not saying there's no connection between our thinking and chemicals. There is. But if it's nothing but chemicals, how can we trust them? Even Darwin recognized this. It's called Darwin's doubt. He said, if we are just the product materially of primates, why should I even trust anything, much less my theory of natural selection? The next major reason is the laws of mathematics. Science depends on the notion that the universe is rational and mathematical at all levels. But how does rationality and mathematics arise from randomness? How do they come from matter? Rationality and mathematics are the product of mind, not matter. So you got reason and the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics, and then number 7, or 7 in my list here, 3 in the addition, human freedom and the ability to make choices. Christopher is somebody who's very concerned about human freedom as I am. But again, if we are just molecules in motion, how do we have human freedom? William Provine from Cornell, he's a materialist, a Darwinist. He points out that we don't have any human freedom if all we are is molecules in motion. Now, Christopher ought not scold anybody for being a snake-handling, Bible-thumping, fundamentalist preacher, because according to his own worldview, that person is that way because these are just chemicals going on in his brain. Neither could you say that Hitler had done anything wrong if it's just chemicals going on in his brain. I mean, what is the murder molecule? How much does justice weigh? These are questions that have no answer in a materialistic worldview, but that is Christopher's worldview. It seems to me that it makes much more sense to say that reason and laws of logic, mathematics, and human freedom come from a great mind that granted us these immaterial realities. The final argument is consciousness. Do you know that a heap of sand and a human brain have the same elements? Why are some carbon-based molecules conscious and others are not? Materialists have no answer for this. Daniel Dennett, another person who would agree with Christopher on many things, he's a materialist, says that consciousness is an illusion because he's a materialist. You're not really witnessing this right now. It's just an illusion. Now, one wonders if he was conscious when he wrote this. But again, there is no explanation for this in an atheistic worldview. Now, I have a couple other arguments on the bench, but I don't have time to get to them. Let me just sum up in 1 minute. We need to take all this data in context, not just one argument, but all of them. What is the best explanation? Christopher has to explain these 8 truths about the universe from an atheistic perspective. He must explain how the universe arose from nothing, how extreme fine-tuning and design arose from chaos, how life arose from non-life, how morality arose from materials, how reason and the laws of logic arose from matter, how mind arose from mud, how mathematics arose from molecules, how human freedom arose from blind repetitive forces, and how consciousness arose from chemicals. If he can't give evidence to explain these truths about reality from an atheistic perspective, if he's just going to state unsupported, speculative possibilities that rely on faith, then I think theism is a more reasonable worldview. Thank you for your attention. I appreciate it.